Well, it might seem like an eon ago, but only a month has passed since Tony Abbott emerged as leader of the Liberal Party. It's third in 2 years, and time's against him. This is an election year, and even if it runs to term, he has 10 months to convince Australians that he's a better choice to lead than the apparently unsinkable Prime Minister. I spoke with Tony Abbott late this evening. Tony Abbott, if the coalition can't run itself, why should people trust it to run the country?
Well, we can run ourselves, and I think that's been pretty evident over the last 4 weeks.
The evidence of the last 2 years is that it can't. You're the third leader in 2 years, and you only got up with half the party vote.
Yes, but as Senator Keneally famously said, a one-vote win is a landslide in politics. Now, I think everything has changed since the 1st of December.
Have you wasted the last 2 years, the coalition that is?
I think we've gone through a necessary period of introspection. I now think we've got our act together. I think we're holding the government to account, and I think we're developing credible policies. And that's why I think it is realistic to think that we can win the next election.
Well, the country's running fairly well. It's going fairly well after the greatest financial crisis to hit the world since the Great Depression. And the government seems to be going fairly well as well. So where do you beat Kevin Rudd? How can you beat Kevin Rudd?
But I think people also understand that Kevin Rudd is all talk and no action.
Do they?
And I think people understand that, sure, he hasn't mucked all that much up economically, but that's because he had a tremendous legacy to work with. He has managed to turn a $20 billion surplus into a $30 billion deficit in just 12 months. He has managed to turn a government that was massively in surplus into a government that's massively in deficit. So he has done a lot wrong, but I take your point. Compared to other countries, we have cruised through the global financial crisis.
And surely the government can take some credit for that. You say they've spent all this money, but of course they did that to prop up the economy, and it worked.
Yes, but there is always a bill to be paid. And in pretending that there is no cost to this, I think the people understand that Kevin Rudd is basically conning them.
But you would have spent money as well. The coalition actually backed the first stimulus package, didn't it?
Yes, which was about a quarter the size of the second stimulus package, which we opposed.
But certainly that money was necessary, and it appears to have done the trick.
But at a high price. And if you look across the Tasman, New Zealand has done just as well, it seems, as Australia, without going into anything like the same level of debt and deficit that we have.
Now, you say the government's done nothing, but of course they've completely remade the industrial relations system to nationalise a system of awards, something that your government didn't even attempt.
And as even Heather Ridout said in today's paper, they need to be extremely careful that they don't destroy the flexibility which both the Keating and the Howard government put into our workplace system, and which has been responsible for us getting through the global financial crisis without the massive increase in unemployment which other countries have suffered.
The economy needed flexibility, but of course the people wanted fairness, and that's something that you took from them with work choices.
Well, that's not true. Sure, work choices was a mistake. It's dead, it's buried, but the no disadvantage test was at the death restored by the former government, and there's no going back by this coalition to the excesses of the former policy.
Is work choices dead and buried? You actually said at your first press conference that the phrase work choices was dead. Is the idea dead as well?
Of course it is, Chris. What we do need, though, is freedom as well as fairness in our workplaces. What we need is freedom from union bullying, and that's certainly that the coalition's policy will be designed to ensure.
Do you still think the science on climate change is crap?
That's not quite what I said. Certainly the science is not nearly as settled as the wilder zealots say. But look, we'll be releasing a strong and effective climate change policy in just a few weeks, and I'll ask you to restrain your impatience and wait and see what we come up with.
But do you believe that man-made global warming is a factor, is actually a fact?
In the end, this is not a question of belief, it's a question of fact. Now, I keep saying that we need more facts and less faith in this whole argument. We should take prudent precautions against credible threats. What we shouldn't do is impose a great big tax on the necessities of daily life that, in the absence of comparable action from other countries, will be entirely futile. And that's why our policy will make sense in a way that the government's policy doesn't.
But it won't be cost-free.
Of course, it won't be cost-free, but nevertheless there is a lot that you can do to reduce emissions and improve the environment that will fund itself.
So it won't be a great big tax, it might be a medium-sized tax, or perhaps a tax that you can't put a number on.
Well, what we will do is fund sensible action, direct action on the environment from the budget in the ordinary way.
But that might mean that you need to change some regulations in order to force change, and that will impose costs on business, and that'll be passed on to people.
But what we're not going to do is impose a great big tax on daily life that won't actually improve the environment.
Do you think that you'll be credible on climate change? Clearly the electorate wants something done about this.
And I think that the coalition in government, both under Mr Howard and under Mr Fraser, were very credible in practical terms on the environment, and I intend to maintain a strong record in practical environmentalism. I regard myself as an environmentalist. My first action in government was to create the Green Corps, which mobilised thousands of young people for practical environmental restoration work. And the interesting thing about the Rudd government is that it's basically wasted its first 2 years when it comes to environmental problems here in Australia that we can actually make a difference to because of its preoccupation with climate change.
Will you really turn back the boats of refugees?
We will take strong action on border security. Now, that is not something, turning boats back is not something that you would do lightly or necessarily frequently, but you've got to have that option at your disposal.
What if they sink their boats?
Well, we would look at each circumstance, each situation on its own merits, but you've got to have the option. And what you've got to understand, Chris, is that John Howard found a problem, created a solution. Mr Rudd found a solution and created a problem.
Is 2,800 refugees, though, really a crisis? Do you really need to launch a campaign against these people?
And I understand that the individuals themselves are, in many cases, decent people seeking a better life. But sovereign countries have to control their own borders. They cannot be exposed to what amounts to peaceful invasion. Now, the truth is that we have to take strong action to secure the borders. Mr Rudd has signally failed to do so. And if we're in government, look at us on our record, we will take strong action.
Do you favour Chinese investment in Australian companies? Because it appears that your finance spokesman doesn't.
I'm in favour of appropriate foreign investment. What I'm not in favour is of nationalisation of Australian industries. And if I don't support Australian government ownership of Australian industries under most circumstances, I'd certainly be pretty wary about Chinese government ownership of Australian industries.
But that's the way this investment comes, isn't it? Do you want that investment in Australia or not?
That's why we have to take a sensible and balanced approach to this.
Now, I see that you put Cory Bernardi to advise you on population policy. Kevin Rudd says that he wants a big Australia, 35 million people by 2050. Is that what you want to see?
Look, I want to see a strong Australia. I want to see Australian families looking to the future with confidence, and I think that families look to the future with confidence will tend to have more kids. Now, I'm all in favour of that. If I also want Australia to continue to be a country which is welcoming to migrants. People have got to understand that when they come here, they're joining our team, but with Australian families looking to have more kids and a continued sensible immigration policy in Australia's national interests, I think we'll be a bigger country in the years to come.
Tony Abbott, we know what you're against. What are you for? What would an Australia with Tony Abbott as Prime Minister look like?
Well, perhaps people who are in some doubt ought to read my book, Battle Lines, which came out last year.
And for those that don't have the moment, the time, can you give us a précis?
But if you look at the book, what you'll see is that I want to see an Australia which has more confidence, more strength, more prosperity. But in particular, I want to see a fair go for families. I want to see more patient-centred healthcare. I want to see more patient power in our health system. That means local boards running hospitals. I want to see more parent power in our education system. That means local boards having more influence over schools. I'm in favour of democracy. I'm in favour of empowering the Australian public. You look at Kevin Rudd, by contrast, Chris, what he likes is big bureaucracy, big unions and great big taxes.
Finally and very briefly, Kevin Rudd, is it personal between you and him? You don't seem to like him very much.
Look, he's my opponent and he might be the best bloke in the country. He might be a fantastic author of children's books. But the fact is, he's my opponent. So I'm not in the business of looking at his good personal qualities. I'm in the business of exposing his poor political qualities.
Tony Abbott, thank you.
Thanks, Chris.